Thank you, Betsy. My collection of personal essays is called Where I'm From Does Not Exist, in part because you won't find Yugoslavia on the contemporary world map. I will read an excerpt from a piece titled The Leader. I was born just 37 days after Marshal Tito passed away. As a child, I often bemoaned this personal misfortune to anyone who would listen. Why was I born too late? If only he would have held on for another 10 years, I might have been one of the lucky pioneers who delivered a bouquet on his birthday. I could have been among those who ran the relay leading up to the celebrations. I could have been on television, all important and serious, as I handed him the baton that contained his birthday wishes, and he accepted it with a gracious smile. I was certain that I had missed out on something special. Of course, Comrade Tito was still all around us everywhere. There wasn't a classroom or an office in Yugoslavia that didn't display his portrait prominently on their walls. He was our president for life, and beyond, it seemed. I grew up under his benevolent, doughy face, his small, bespectacled eyes, making sure that I was always studying hard and being a responsible and respectful little comrade. Streets, squares, and even towns across all 6 Yugoslav republics bore his name, and the national television was always broadcasting grainy black and white images of our brave leader during World War II. My generation was the last to swear allegiance to Tito in an official elementary school ceremony. As part of Yugoslavia's Republic Day celebrations of 1987, we, the first graders of Radoje Domanović Elementary School, were admitted to the Union of Pioneers. It was an organization for 7 to 15-year-olds that offered us a taste of what joining the Communist Party would be like. There was a dense, wordy pledge involved that had to be memorized for the swearing-in ceremony. I practiced it for weeks, grappling to find mnemonic associations for the phrases, many of which held no intrinsic meaning in my 7-year-old mind. Today, as I become a pioneer, I give my pioneer's word of honor that I shall love our homeland, self-managed, socialist federal Republic of Yugoslavia, that I shall spread brotherhood and unity and the principles for which Comrade Tito fought, and that I shall value all peoples of the world who respect freedom and peace. I also struggled to master the proper way of tying the red pioneer scarf around my neck. To demonstrate the unity mentioned in the pledge, all pioneers wore the same uniform with a red scarf and a blue pioneer hat with a 5-pointed star badge affixed at the front. The hat was called Titovka, after Comrade Tito, of course. We were shown how to tie the scarf in school, but the expectation was that our parents, once pioneers themselves, would help us perfect the operation. I was shocked to find out that my mother had no idea how to properly tie the pioneer scarf. What's worse, she thought it was appropriate to suggest that I use her round gold decorative pin to secure the scarf around my neck instead. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the next reader, Rasha Al-Khatib, whose poetry reaches across languages, countries, and continents, and who I am proud to call a friend.
Thank you, Anna. Hi, my name is Rasha, and I'll be reading 2 poems from my collection, Hem, on hyphenate identity and third culture people. The first is Chikunku, spelled as C-O-U-P, and the second is International Market. Chikunku. Thank you for saying I come from a beautiful country. It's like I'm being complimented for soil and borders great bee created, only the latter. I love hearing you're welcome because I'm stamped with customs on imports like a cultural overstay past unconditional hospitality. After all, I'm visiting the motherland. Mother knows I'm not her daughter because the sidewalk is covered in plastic bags, cigarettes, and cats. Only the latter came as visitors and never left. She knows to clean up when guests come, so maybe she thinks I'm staying this time. I wonder how it feels to have a visitor for a daughter. Mother knows. She says she wishes she could be my country, but the world is a port of wider borders, each with water taxis waiting to inflate the price of my negotiations, like dispute resolution theories, my tip. This is the Middle East after all. I love being asked what's going on over there. I wish they would point so I know where. I just say pollution, the political kind. Look at me, I'm so kind, like I'm thanking them for asking. Mother says I represent, so my personality should reflect. I say this isn't denial, but she stopped listening when I stopped hearing. I'm leaving tomorrow. I can already feel my spine drop when the exit stamp says the only goodbye. Every welcome home shakes me like an olive jug, or the time leaves mother wouldn't let me leave without. Every terminal feels like the last as I wonder if I'll ever be able to return. And what would bring me back to watch parents get meals for their hungry children, as leaders are full of what will become beautiful leftovers. International market. Our mothers poured coffee like salt shakers on C-section wounds. Their blood sizzled, burned, and fused into scars, as if to show they were smarter than medicine, that all they needed to heal, they learned from their mothers as they sat in hospital beds with prepaid phone cards, dialing, waiting to connect, and knowing they can't stay on the line long. She has a baby to feed. Our mothers called their mothers only when they wanted them to know they were still alive. There's not much to say when the call can end at any second, mid-update. If she needs anything, she'll leave a missed call, our mothers say, knowing it's another card on the family's grocery list. She hauls her babies and samples aisles, eavesdropping for a neighbor. Our mothers would never allow us to leave them like they did theirs. Instead, they buy bread in bulk to store in freezers, knowing they're set for the next 3 months of the same everyday life. She calls her daughters and tells them she wishes she felt like a mother. She has no one to talk to, no one to answer the phone. Our mothers are used to being alone. They wouldn't know how to not feel like that anymore. Thank you. And now I have the honor of introducing Tatiana Huang, and she will read from her collection of short stories, Empty Cans, about love, life, and in sobriety.
Thank you, Rasha. I'll be reading from Sunday Drowning from my collection, Empty Cans. It was Tuesday when Daisy spotted the rat. She'd seen it scurrying along the wall of the rear dining room toward the kitchen. She was on her way back to the kitchen as well. An overfilled busbin sagged in her arms. Her breath caught in her throat, and she froze mid-step, watched its tail disappear behind the swinging metal door. Thunderous banging came from the kitchen seconds later. She looked over her shoulder into the main dining room to see if anyone else had noticed. The diners were either oblivious, too involved in their dinner rituals, or too polite to point and scream. The latter seemed unlikely to Daisy. She exhaled and shouldered her way through the door. She tripped over a ladle, which had been surrendered to the floor, and passed the busbin off to Eduardo, who was manning dish that evening. "A rat," he said, gesturing with his chin at the ladle. "I saw," said Daisy. "No one out there did, though." He grunted and heaved the busbin onto the counter and said, "You tell boss we need the tracks. He don't listen to us." Daisy nodded, picked up the ladle, and balanced it on top of the mountain of dishes already in the busbin. Daisy was on her way home when Kevin called. She put him on speakerphone. "Hi," she said. "Hey," he said. "Sounds like you're in a wind tunnel." "I'm driving." "Oh, well, want to swing by? My roommate's at his girl's. It'll just be you and me tonight," he said suggestively. "I would if I could, babe, but I'm wiped out after today," she said, trying to sound sweet. She was expended, that was true, but it wasn't solely due to the rat at work. It was a culmination of everything, little of which she felt she could do anything about now. Feeling bad, she added, "Come over to my place?" The hum of the car and road overtook the silence from the other end for a matter of seconds, which, to Daisy, seemed to stretch time. "I'm kind of settled in for the night, actually. I just rolled a blunt. I think I'm going to get into some games. Sorry," he said. "It's okay," said Daisy. "Tomorrow, maybe?" "Yeah, sure," said Kevin. "Love you." "Love you too." Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. Daisy sat on the floor of her shower. She stayed there, eyes squeezed shut, legs crossed, head resting against the wall until the hot water petered out and ran lukewarm. She got out and stood on the bath mat, dripping, letting the cold air raise bumps over her skin. She shivered like that for a while before she took the towel from the hook and dried herself. She went to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of cheap Merlot, then thought better of it and dumped it down the sink. She curled up in an armchair and turned on the TV. As merciful sleep began to take Daisy, she remembered the rat traps. Shit. The rat would live to see another day. She sent off a quick message to her boss and stayed awake until the birds began to chirp. Some hours later, Daisy woke up still wrapped in a towel, and she lurched toward the bathroom. She pinched the last pregnancy test from the open box in her medicine cabinet and positioned herself on the toilet. She set it on the sink and waited. She checked her phone. Her boss hadn't replied. She started to write a message to Kevin and stopped herself. She looked at the test. 2 lines. She bit her lip and hissed out a sigh. She lifted the lid of the trash can with her hand and nudged the test into it to join the other positive tests collected inside. She didn't hate the idea of a baby, but it was the idea she didn't hate. She knew a baby was a very real, very all-consuming, life-altering thing. The kind of thing that she hadn't imagined herself doing with Kevin. In fact, she didn't imagine herself doing much with Kevin at all lately. A breakup had been on Daisy's mind the past few weeks, but she'd never come to the end of a relationship so easily. Breakups usually came with an exclamation mark, but this was different. It wasn't that anything had changed between them, but perhaps that was why things had changed in her. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Glancy. Glancy is a lover of majestic melodies and lyrics that lance the soul at its essence. He will read us an excerpt from his memoir, Due in Time, about the journey of a young Black man discovering his Blackness by fighting through his own darkness and overcoming trauma.
Thank you, Tatiana. I'll read an excerpt from title essay of my collection, Doin Time. As this scene opens, I've just gotten out of jail in California. Instead of going home to Baltimore, I ended up meeting and moving in with a single mom named Desi. Her best friend was a girl named Dee Dee, and we often hung out with her boyfriend, OT. In this scene, OT and I stumbled into a bit of trouble. The weekend after Valentine's Day, the 4 of us were enjoying some barbecue. When I saw there was only 1 beer left, I suggested OT and I take a walk to get some more. At the end of the block, we came on a white house. Suddenly, the 4 long-haired, light-skinned lokes standing on the front porch ran up on us. One of the first 4 cracked OT with an overhand right. Once he got clipped and knocked off his feet, the rat pack was on. I tried to step towards the melee, but the one who whistled stepped to me. "Hey, don't get caught up in the mess, homie. This ain't got nothing to do with you, unless you wanted to. Where you from, cuz?" "Cuz, I'm from Rolling 60s, but my OG Big Lou Dog from Park Village." "Lou Dog, you say?" He stepped back, sizing me up. "Yeah, I don't know about that, homie. The Lou Dog I know just came home." "Yeah, I know. A week before me. Nah, hold up a minute." He called over to the Rat Pack smashing OT, where Big Lou Dog just came home from. "I think he was out CRC, cuz." "Nah, homie. We both was out in California Men's Colony. CMC. Yeah, that's it. Out San Luis Obispo up north. The Lunar homie up there." "All right, we'll take your word for it. Big Lou, cool dude." The one I was talking to seed me up and nodded his head at me as a Crip who recognizes a Crip would. "So I can take my man here?" I said, pointing to the writhing mess of OT. "Cuz, you need to be careful who you call your man. This nigga rolled out with an 8-ball and thought there was going to be no attribution. Cuz, this my girl's bitch's nigga. I don't know him for real, I said, walking over to OT. Get your ass up as I extended my hand. Oh my God, Dee Dee roared after OT opened his screen door and crashed to the floor in a bloody heap. What the hell happened? And why you don't look like him? Cause I ain't run up with no niggas work like I ain't gotta pay for it, I said, walking over to Desi. Come on, let's bounce. Tweety, how you gonna let them do that to him? Look at him. That's supposed to be your boy. Really, you gonna side with them? I'm supposed to come back all lumped up or shot because he took some nigga's crack? He probably smoked it. They ain't got no money. Look at his broke ass. Whoa, what you mean he took some nigga's work? Dee Dee pulled away from OT and fired up a Newport. You messing with that stuff again? Dee Dee turned her attention away from us, hawked over a man, and kicked him in his ribs. You gonna get the hell out of my house. I ain't playing this time. Come on, Desi, let's go, please. This ain't for us. I tugged at her arm. I'm sorry, Dee Dee. We're gonna go. Call me, honey, she said to a steaming Dee Dee as the smoke from her Newport wafted past her flaming eyes. Thank you. Our next reader, Chris Hart, is a fiction writer whose crisp, colloquial style reveals the essential humanity and emotional complexity of his characters.
Thank you, Glancy. This story is from my book, Useful. It's about two sisters and alcoholism. It's a memory piece about the younger sister whose name was Mayvel, which coincidentally is the title of the story. Mayvel. The woman in the hospital gown and pink robe was standing in the middle of the street, giving directions to the man in the large sedan. The woman in the street outside the medical center pavilion was talking to the man in the car, shivering in the early April night and talking. The man in the sedan had a floral arrangement next to him on the front seat, small red roses and ornamental greenery, looking like a last-minute purchase from the grocery on the bay side of the medical center property. The woman said, "Who are those for?" smiling and leaning down to get a better view of the man's expression of care and concern as the breeze stirred up a few stray snowflakes from the pavilion roof. The woman said, "Wow, it's cold. What am I doing out here?" And the man was laughing and she was laughing. The woman in the hospital gown under her robe was helping the man find the parking lot, and the two of them were acting as if they'd been friends for years. The woman was my sister, Mayvel. She died later that night. I want to tell you about Mayvel, and I want to do it in a way that will make you laugh through your tears. I want to show her in an honest light, not a harsh light or a spiritual light, or even the kind of light that would say to you, whatever she did, it's forgiven. I can do that because it's been some time since Mayvel passed, and I think about that night and that man. His name was Everett, and he had his own problems to deal with. I saw and I understand what that means, how it encompasses a world or the whole world and everything in it. Everett wore dark blue coveralls with a cloth patch over where his heart was. It said his name, and I think it said Sky Chief as well. He left a motor oil smell behind him, and his black skin was stretched tight from work and obligation. He held the flower basket away from his body as he hurried from his car to the hospital lobby. He had a catching smile. I remember that. As we stood there watching Everett go inside, Mayvel told me, "He's so nice, though. I think he said he's here to see his wife, but he didn't know what part of the building to go to. This place is really confusing, right? It's like a maze. But I know, I'll come in." I don't understand alcoholism. I'll admit that first thing. Read books about it, sure. Went through it with her, sure. But did I know enough to get up off the couch and help her? No. Did I do a lot more than worry? No. Now I can see how worry turns to sorry. I think she was 15 and I was 17 when I took notice of it. Something inside her pounding on her brain to get out and, I don't know, maybe pour a drink right there. We were standing on a beach in Florida, a late summer vacation with Mom and dishonest Don. First time us kids had seen the ocean. "Look at that straight line," Mayvel said to me, getting in close to my ear because the wind was blowing hard in the late afternoon. Look at how that horizon just goes and goes. That sea is so black and the sky is so white, and the line is the only thing that you can focus on. You see it? You'd think it would bend, but it don't. It's so straight. I just want to ride along with it. She ran away from me in a wide circle, arms up, just carrying on. Mayvelle said that, and her breath was warm on the side of my face, and it makes me shiver from the memory almost 40 years later. Warm, sweet, not stinking, even after the 15-hour car ride from Tennessee. There was nothing to her then but love and curiosity. Thank you. And now here's Aaron Tucker, a poet whom I really admire. We were in a class together a while back and we co-wrote a fantasy story. Aaron brought a lot of imagination and positivity to that project. He's fantastically open to new possibilities and his writing proves it. Enjoy his reading.
Thank you, Chris. I will be reading from my book, Pareidolia, which is the phenomenon you might be familiar with, just not by name, of the tendency to see objects and patterns with established meaning in random objects. But in terms of this book, it is a collection of 30 different personas, some of which are interconnected, which I hope you like. I'll start with Chris, who I describe as a bipolar Jersey girl who looks kind of Puerto Rican. Afraid one day you'll look at everyday objects and only find familiar faces? Not me. As a self-lit matchstick, I surrender myself to the naturally surreal. Big Bird's bubbling likeness won't get sneezed into mom's coffee creamer every day, and yet I still update my current relationship status to extremely distracted. All pill bottle disclaimers loosely translate to, you can never be watched too carefully. So go ahead and call me crazy instead of wholly unbearable, like children of belly dancers bisecting tabletop mangoes. Not yet delivered, my stomach aches at coincidence's mundane death. I am still refusing to deny the existence of smiley faces the size of Sarasota. But please, God, don't let me smear this cherry Coke lip balm. After all, I have an image to maintain. Next, I'll be reading a collaboration between Cardi B and Mary J. Blige entitled Not Gonna Fry, Just Inflame. Don't let nobody dance on my grave for free, Mary J. Not when I've been a steady shot since your best forward slash to date. An undisputed kind of crazy that's turning my bruised tits blacker than a faceless playwright. Drop the act and try selling the real B. No, nigga. Try coming at a blood straight and miss more than this year's All-Star game for sure, yo. Now airing from the top of America's favorite crack house. Nah, check that. These juicy thighs can't help but thrive while walking through man doors. Dusting off open slips like Greek orders back on World Tour. Like it's flu season for the Wicked Witch of the West. Or maybe I always wanted to leave the Bronx in search of number 23 accuracy. I swear the whole hood became my sanctuary the last time I let the Space Jam soundtrack homogenize our volatile race. Black music that's naturally as sensitive as a slighted cuticle. But please believe, as long as somebody still miscalculated the improper fraction B almost gave birth to after tripping on a track-free treadmill, I'm gonna geek like crazy on my own stunning figure. True that, Cardi B can't get enough of herself. But I'm gliding through the gold frosting on top of Mary J. Blige's Going Nowhere cake at least once before my next impromptu toast to gang violence. Another sham rotodile ring from a made-for-TV queen of obscene. That is, until we hook up again. Thank you. Next, we have Sam Allen, who's an incredibly earnest fiction writer with a menacingly methodical approach to her craft. I've known Sam a long time and find her stories so full of character, devilish charm, and unyielding clarity. Sam, take it away.
Thank you, Aaron. I will be reading the title story from my collection of short works of fiction titled Sunday Dinner. I keep holding Lena's hand under the table. Mom, I finally find my voice. I just wanted to thank you for letting me bring Lena to dinner. Yes, thank you so much, Lena says. I'm not the best cook, so I eat a lot of takeout. My girlfriend is a great cook, but we're still unpacking, so our kitchen isn't quite ready to make anything. Usually the rule is only family and significant others for Sunday dinner, my father says. But when Abby told us about you and how you just moved, we couldn't say no. With a nod, my mother adds, it was a pleasure to have you, Lena. Therefore, welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you. There was another reason I wanted to bring Lena tonight. I hear my voice waver for just a moment. I can't tell you how happy I am that you were also understanding about her being in a relationship with a woman, because I'm that woman. Lena is my girlfriend. I expect the silence that follows my announcement. Around the table is a void so vast I don't know if noise will ever exist again. What I don't expect is Kyla being the first person to break that silence. They didn't know? She asks, disbelief in her voice. You knew? Noah and I say at the same time. Abby, I know we're not as close as we were in high school, but I was there the first time you kissed a girl, she reminds me. Without a word, my mom gets up from the table and walks out back into the kitchen. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Noah asks his fiance. She turns to him sharply. Well, firstly, I thought she might come to you and confide in you about her feelings. If she was going to tell anyone, it would have been you, not your parents or John. Secondly, I don't out people, even if you are my fiance and she is your sister. Coming out is tough, and how and when it happens is up to the person who is coming out. So you're okay with it? I ask hesitantly. Kylie smiles at me and nods. For a moment or two, my brother doesn't speak. Eventually, he says, if Lena makes you happy, Abby, then can I really object? I feel emotion start to expand in my throat, and Lena grips my hand a little tighter. Yes, my mom's voice is stern as she comes back out into the dining room. Yes, yes, of course you can object, Noah. What your sister's doing is an abomination. Did you just call your only daughter an abomination? Kylie asks. Mom, just calm down, Noah says, voice soft. Leviticus 18:22, my mother says, voice cracking a little. We all know what that means. I know this is difficult for you to accept, I say, looking from one parent who's holding back tears to the other who hasn't said anything. I know what we've all been taught, and I thought that you might be able to look past it and realize that it doesn't change anything. I'm sorry if this has somehow hurt or upset you, but I'm not sorry for who I am, and I'm not sorry that I love Lena. That's all my mother can take. She rushes out of the dining room, and I hear her heels clicking on the hardwood as she stomps upstairs. Slowly, my dad gets to his feet and looks across the table. Thank you. Now it is my honor to introduce my friend, my fellow Coven member, and my Jedi Master, a writer whose voice is as honest, straightforward, and real on the page as it is when he's talking to you. Get ready for some laughs and insights from Mr. Doug Steele.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to be reading a little bit of excerpt from my book, Better That I Tell You, collection of essays, and this is from a piece called The Knock. My mother and I had a loving yet adversarial relationship stemming from the fact that while I looked like my father, I was her twin personality-wise. She gave me insatiable curiosity, quick wit, and she also gave me a sharp-ass tongue. My mother was a savage. She could cut your throat and call all your courage into question with the simple use of words. And having been on the bad side of that equation many times, I learned how to outflank her, sometimes thinking that I would have the balls to mount a counterattack, but common sense prevailed, and I always kept my mouth shut, all the while learning from the master. She passed on to me a lot of things: the love of reading, love of puzzles and football, and Star Trek. I never did learn her recipe for potato salad, though, and to this day, I can't replicate it. Now, while my father taught me a great many things, it was my mother, through words and actions, who forged me into the ever-questioning, always challenging, good-natured, salty-tongued smartass that I am today. We were more male and female sides of the same coin. Problem is, neither one of us could back down from a fight, so conflict was inevitable. The bickering always started slowly and usually ended up with me leaving, because to stay meant listening to the epic lecture about my faults and shortcomings and how I failed to live up to her expectations. The benefit of joining the Navy at the time was I got to skip the lecture. So, one June weekend, I was on leave and I drove from Bethesda Naval Hospital, which is my duty station at the time, to my mother's house in Pennsylvania, where I could wash clothes and get some home cooking. I remember she asked me, "Dougie, what did you think about your childhood?" It was a very odd question, in my opinion, because she never asked a question without expecting an answer. So I gathered my thoughts, and my internal response was like, well, I couldn't understand why our houses couldn't be as clean as the other mothers. There was always dust or some mismatched linen or ever-present dirty dishes in the sink. Sometimes the old lady clothes you wore kind of embarrassed me. I mean, I know we weren't rich, but I was kind of hoping you could do better. I mean, another thing, how come you and dad couldn't work out your issues? You were always yelling at the man, telling me how he didn't do this or he did that. Is there any wonder he left you and went to move in with another woman? Also, how come you could never make it to my football games on Saturdays, but you always found time to hang out with your lady posse and play bingo? I don't quite understand that. Now, mom then asked me if I wanted some tea. Do you still drink tea, or has the big bad sailor man taken to drinking coffee? I smiled and I said yes to the tea. She turned on the elderly gas stove to the right of the sink and ignited the burner. She reached to grab the old crimson tea kettle, but still coated from grease from some long ago fried meal. She looked at me and said, "So you were saying?" She added this as a reminder that I have yet to answer her question about my childhood in Casa Steele. Thank you very much. And now I have the honor of introducing to you my friend, my classmate, and my Wu-Tang sister. If you don't know her name, please write it down. You will be glad that you did. Miss Emely Rodriguez.
Thanks, Doug. I'm Emely Rodriguez. I'll be reading 3 poems from my book, Dreaming El Salvador, a collection tributing the beauty of El Salvador and the mosaic of its people. Ringa. Esau ate an hour of my day until I finally proved I kicked Spanglish for good. There was no warning of the arrangement, just a woman. She arrived for me one day, removed me from class, and said, "See you again tomorrow." I complied. I just followed this woman each time, but I don't remember her. Not the way she taught, not the color of her hair or the texture of her voice. There is nothing but the beige room and the overused chalkboard, its faint green paled underneath years of white dust. June released me. My tongue never left that room. Conjugation ceased, failed verbs, broken up eres now singular. My setas blended with s's in time for our annual trip to El Salvador. I arrived gringa, too distant from la lengua de la patria that my tias tell me cállate, and mama agrees. Confession. I meant it when I said I wanted to love la lengua de la patria. And I spent years of memory on trying to imitate tormentas de acentos, the same way palabras melted into one another as my abuelita scolded me, the same way palabras dip into syllabic harmony, a song I want to sing. My tongue is a disaster, loose and slippery. Mouth can only catch words as they stream out each corner. Mispronounced because palate doesn't recognize these moves. Too confused. Lengua is too confused from years of another language. I know, that's an excuse though. I'm just not bilingual enough. 6 years of Spanish classes couldn't save this clumsy muscle, this unfit, little rebellious thing flailing for dear life. Que vergüenza. If I could pronounce it, que vergüenza, I'd say. The moment I read my poems, the jig is up. Palabras die en mi boca. Cachimbona. I two-step to bachata and stumble between cumbias. Estas canciones me frustran. Drums subdue me, guitarras consume me. My feet are foreign, soaked in soil from across seas, ancestors' beats, too slippery for me. Distance and uncertainty birth me. I am of another land, Parents planted me elsewhere to grow their dream. Mi piel está tallada del sol, pero no es suficiente. No como mi gente. Our shades can never be the same when winter stains. Pero soy cachimbona con la lengua, una bicha perdida dentro de dos bocas, pero buena para hablar. My mouth is insolente, in love with the vulgar passion behind our caliche, and hungry for acentos only Salvadoreños know. My people are born of volcanoes, and I got that magma in me. Thank you. This is the end of the first act. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Now we'll take a brief 10-minute intermission. See you all back here for the second act.
I'm reading from Interior Lives, and this is the story of a breakup disguised as a recipe. Serves 1. Ingredients: bread, 2 sliced. Any is fine, although I generally prefer sourdough bread. He was a whole wheat person. We generally had to compromise. When I say any sort of bread, I don't mean the good sort of 12-grain bread with the sunflower seeds that they sell on Sunday mornings at the farmer's market under 83. I mean the 2 for $2.99 bread on the bottom shelf at Giants that sticks to the roof of your mouth like wet cardboard. One time, I slipped on wet cardboard walking home from karaoke in the rain. We were drunk on buckets of Malibu and juice, our throats hoarse from screaming Bruce Springsteen songs. When I requested to sing the Patti Smith version of Because the Night, the DJ grilled me, her speech slurring and her blue eyes searing through my brown skin. You sure you know this song? You don't look like you know this song. When we got home, it was too late to order pizza, so we decided to make something to eat. We fell asleep on the couch, drunk and covered in crumbs, while watching Friends reruns at 3 a.m. I'm a Phoebe with the credit card debt of a Rachel. None of the girls on that show look like me. Cheese, 1 to 2 slices. I would suggest cheddar or even a Munster, but never American. I should have known we were doomed when he tried to convince me that Kraft singles count as cheese. It says it right there on the label: pasteurized prepared cheese product. It's an approximation. We were an approximation. I realized this when we went to Vermont last year for Thanksgiving. I made a joke about being the only Black person in a 50-mile radius, and rather than sensing my insecurity, he took offense. My family doesn't think of you as Black, he said. You're taking this too seriously. Butter, salted, not margarine or, God forbid, unsalted butter. He had high blood pressure and insisted on buying unsalted. Honestly, what's worse than something that's supposed to be amazing but doesn't live up to its expectations? Coming home and realizing he's gone? The unsettling feeling of pseudo relief that follows? We'd been quietly fighting for a month when he left. His passiveness bled into everything, and nothing felt like a problem to him. On one of our last mornings, he was listening to Kendrick Lamar in the shower, and he hadn't realized that I'd come in to use the bathroom. He rapped along with confidence, his mediocre white boy intonation never stuttering, never stammering through a single lyric, never skipping over a single nigga. When I flushed, he said, I didn't know you were in here. When he moved out, he took nothing with him except for his clothes. Melt a knob of butter in a frying pan over medium heat. While the butter melts, spread room temperature butter on both sides of the bread. Compose sandwich, bread, cheese, bread. Grill on both sides until cheese is fully melted and bread is golden brown. Slice on the bias because triangles taste better. Eat over a paper towel while sitting on the couch. Feel free to use the paper towel to dab your eyes if at any point you find yourself crying for no reason. The feeling will pass. Serves 1. Thank you. Up next is Stephanie Harper, visual artist, storyteller, and poet who lets everything out of the bag. She's reading from Big Purse, a genre-bending poetry collection. Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you. Big Purse is a collection of poetry and lyrics that captures a satisfying journey through womanhood with a very melodic, familiar tone. Featuring a brown and black collage of sultry and savage, Big Purse is a literary soundtrack that puts a pulse to feminine hip hop poetry. I'll be reading 2 works from Big Purse, one entitled A to Z, Pick a Vow. And also, as a consequence, it gets hectic. Black bleak melanin can't reject the unexpected. Chapped lips from cocaine campaigns leaves residue. Demeaning debates disvalue leaves further proof. Empowerment enabling you to embrace falsely accused fascists and feminists fair game. Genocide, gentrification generally means you too. Hood, heritage, history, and lessons. Ignorant, illiterate, can't write in ink. Jim Crow, Jack John by color lines leaves me colorblind. Karma is kinetic, kinked, and chasmic. Language loosely passed through lineage. Mantras and mottos yelling, what's up, what's good? Neither niggas nor Negroes never needed names. Opportunists offering coupons to oppositions. Preachers protesting, pulling pimps through with propositions. Queens quickly quilt crowns of quim. Rappers and rapists, rapers and rappers given the same production credits. Sarcasm sounds like systematic sanctions in running through Southside. Tough to talk when taped and tasered to tortured, thrown on. Units unified in the underground projects by urns. Vexed, violence is only victory stained in vain. We split in wigs no matter the consequences. X-rated, explicit examples of young yearning for yesterdays, of OG memories, ziplocked and bottled for the hall. Second piece I'll be reading is entitled Rings. Cut me open, count the rings. I got mummies hidden in tombs. I'm molten rock when touched. Eons of trauma hardened and marked. Residues line my body like dirty tubs. Touch any place on me, there's nothing virgin. A tree uprooted and repotted to only be neglected and shaded. Slice off pieces, I won't bark. My pain only makes pleasure to be written on. Whether torn, beaten, bruised, the trunk of my body is bamboo. Bended and holding under fists, chokes, slams, as I overthink the notion of strong Black woman. The magical title given when the task is impossible. Rape is impossible. It is impossible to rape a whole forest, he said. They are just trees, bearing all flaws and perfections. I branched out to him. He shook my leaves, leaving me raw, willowing in the wind, waiting for forgiveness. I was crowned strong Black woman at 14. No one was around when I fell. This tree. Did anyone hear it? Or is the wildfire blazing through my innocence not loud enough? Sap seeped from me, and I, a bamboo from the Congo, bled. Out on the bathroom floor of Uncle's house, bled. Out, first kisses, handhold, bashful touches. Cut my dead pieces off. Don't you see the rings converging? Merging like adjoining oceans? Ruined? My sawdust is mere remnants of strain that I blew in the faces of pyros who advocate for forest fires. And I, a bamboo in the Congo, standing in the midst of flames. Thank you. And it is my pleasure, my very much so pleasure, to introduce Kyla Cullinane. She's such a pleasure to know, and her willingness to stick to her guns makes her writing fierce, witty, and lasting. She'll be reading from her short story collection, Parallel Lines, which explores experiences from grief to love and marriage and family through snapshots of everyday life.
Thank you, Stephanie. Today I will be reading an excerpt from the title story of my collection, Parallel Lines. It is about a woman who has had 3 miscarriages but is pregnant again. To help her feel less anxious about this pregnancy, her husband, Jim, has organized a scenic trip through Arches National Park in Utah. At this point, they have arrived in Moab, Utah, and are stopping for lunch. She feels anxious and frustrated about this new pregnancy. Moab's a small town, just a single 2-lane highway lined with restaurants and small businesses. Jim pulled into a small but packed parking lot about halfway through town. A dusty neon sign on the roof of the single-story building touted, "Best food in Moab." I led the way to the hostess right inside the rustic rough-hewn entrance. "How many?" she asked in an annoyingly cheerful voice. "2, please." "Thank you," Jim smiled. She led us to a booth inside, next to a window, and the next table over, a beautiful brown-eyed baby scribbled with crayons on a children's menu. A wave of longing and grief washed over me and crashed into the powerful maternal instinct that has ushered me along this journey. I looked away and stared at the menu in front of me. The thought of my usual choice, a turkey club, made me nauseous. I looked at Jim, hoping maybe he would reach his hand out, intuitively perceiving my distress. Instead, he leaned over toward the other table and said, "Excuse me, miss. I just wanted to say that you have a gorgeous baby girl." "Oh, thank you very much," the woman said, smiling. Jim nodded and reached his hand across the table toward me. I took it, thinking he meant to comfort me. As I took it, I felt the heat of tears behind my eyes. "We're about to have our first." He genuinely smiled. I stopped breathing in shock at what I had just heard. I snatched my hand away. "This is our fourth, Jim." I had to get out of there, get some space. I stood, I grabbed the keys off the table and ran out of the restaurant, not looking back at what must have been a shocked look on Jim's face and an indignant one on the woman's. I jumped into the Jeep and backed out of the packed parking lot. Speeding away from the restaurant and from my husband, I took my first right, trying to get out of town, away from people, away from their beautiful, healthy babies. The road wound through a small residential area before making a sharp southward turn along another section of the Colorado River. As the road straightened and the houses disappeared, I pressed the gas pedal. I took a deep breath when the speedometer approached 50. I slowed and followed the road along the river for a short time before pulling over, tears clouding my vision. I couldn't breathe. Every breath I took felt useless. I leaned on the steering wheel, head against my forearms. Slow, deep breaths. "You can do this." He didn't mean it. He did mean it. He didn't know any better. He should know better. I need to get out of the car. I stepped out, leaving the Jeep running. I didn't care if someone came up and stole it. That would be the perfect ending to this horrific trip of Jim's. I walked to the bank of the river and sat on a warm, dry rock. The river flowed rather quickly past me. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and set it next to me, letting it vibrate on the rock. Jim's face smiled back at me from an old picture I had taken before we lost Rosie, our first. I had only been pregnant for 8 weeks, had barely enough time to process the fact that I was going to be a mother when I woke up with the worst cramps of my life. I went to the bathroom and started bleeding. I woke Jim up and we went to the ER where they told me I had had a miscarriage and lost her. At that point, we didn't know if we were going to have a boy or a girl, but I knew that the moment I saw the 2 pink parallel lines on the pregnancy test, that this was my Rosie. Thank you. And now I have the distinct honor to introduce my friend and colleague, Alise Aleman. She will be reading a story from her short story collection, Shadow, about a young woman imagining her maternal grandmother's funeral while dealing with conflicting feelings. Take it away.
Hi, I'm going to be reading an excerpt from my story, Poquino. The Puerto Rican sun baked the cobblestones as our sandals shuffled towards the building containing carnations and a casket. You were dressed in some outfit made of silk and flowers. If it were up to you, I know that you would have chosen something you used to wear at the parties you hosted at your house. A bright colored blouse, maybe in pink or light red. Tight-fitting tan pants that hugged your waist. Chancletas that never stayed planted to the ground as you kept moving around the house to feed everyone or dance in the kitchen. I remember those parties. The aroma of rice and beans coming from the pots, flan jiggling in the fridge, and salsa singing through the speakers. You grabbed my hand, inviting me to dance. I squirmed away with a shy smile. You held me by the wrist and pulled me towards the living room, and I let you. Letting you flap my arm in the air like a noodle, you always said I needed to be proud of my culture. I had to learn Spanish. You always pointed out a little girl on one of your Spanish dance shows who shook her hips faster than she moved her feet, but I never had the courage to tell you that I wouldn't be her. A crowd of people formed a line to your casket like they were at a town fair, except the odor wasn't fried foods and vomit. Laughter and shrills from children didn't travel through the air. People never stared at the multicolored lights from the Ferris wheel or got that uncertain feeling in their stomachs when they saw the gravitron. My hands weren't holding thin bars of an animal's cage. A sugar glider never jumped down and cocked its head at me, its long fuzzy tail swaying. I didn't beg you to buy me one. The thought if it tasted sweet not once entered my mind. Your finger wasn't pointing at the bud of my breast. Your arms never covered me as we walked away from the marsupial. Tears didn't stream down my face. A shopping bag full of training bras wasn't on my bed the next day. The line formed, and there was the smell of flowers, the stale stillness of the air, and sounds of people sniffling in a dimly lit room. I decided to remain seated. My mother grabbed my arm and hoisted me up. I surrendered because she was my mother and you were her mother. We stood there, my mother, my father, my brother, and me. My grandfather, who I thought might have died from a broken heart, held onto his cane, his body swaying slightly in silence. We surrounded your casket, and I looked anywhere but at you. The cloth of the casket, the dog-shaped watermark on the ceiling, the red and gold ornate patterned carpet. My father held my mother as she cried. I felt a tightness in my chest because I could count the number of times on one hand I'd seen my mother cry. My father's eyes leaked a little. I liked to think my brother might cry, but I wasn't certain. Maybe he had been like me and didn't shed a tear or look at your face as you rested in that box. You covered in makeup and clothes that would never shake to the beats of merengue again. Thank you. Our next reader is memoirist Kim Uslan, whose writing on grief is raw and powerful. Her book is called Please Don't. Today, she's reading her short essay, Writing After, where she deals with the immediate aftermath of her brother Scott's death.
Thanks, Alise. This essay is from my collection, Please Don't, a memoir and essays about my relationship with my brother Scott. Writing After. When I write my first poem 1 week after Scott has died, a professor in my MFA program comes up to me after class and says, "I can't believe you're already writing about this." He is well-meaning, and he gives me a very kind and very awkward hug, so I just shrug and say I can't imagine writing about anything else. It's trite but true. There is nothing else. The poem's okay. I finished the semester, but I don't remember much about it. After an impossible, ephemeral winter break, I return to the program and find I must write an essay in 3 days. It will be about Scott, of course, because what else is there? But when I sit down to write it, I immediately know something is terribly wrong. It's not hard. I'm enjoying it. My lines are pithy and the flow makes sense, and I think to myself, I can sell this story. When I read the finished product, I'm pleased and sick to my stomach. It's funny, well-crafted, what my professor will call crystalline, and I'll wish I'd never fucking written it. Now, when I think about my brother's funeral, my own lines ring in my head, well-formed and insightful and nicely rendered, dulling the ugly, raw ache behind my eyes. I take the essay to workshop and everybody loves it. When I get into my car after class, I sob so hard that I can't leave the parking lot. What the fuck have I done? Putting the story on paper has stolen my own heart from me, has stolen my brother and replaced him with Helvetica. I won't do this again, I vow, but I still send the essay to my parents and my sister. They think it's wonderful. And then, of course, the semester continues and I have to write another essay. I'm home for the weekend and find myself driving past the restaurant where my father took me 2 days after Scott's suicide. I can see the scene vividly, the sick irony of the decor, New Orleans themed, and my father's sheepish expression when he confessed to me that, as crazy as it sounded, he wasn't sure my brother was dead. I think that would be a good opener. Seconds after, I can see the essay in my mind with thrilling clarity, the title, the opening, the movement, the most poignant lines. I can tell it will be good. I've virtually written the entire thing in my head by the time I get home, and though I don't quite do it in the 20 minutes before the midnight deadline, I do turn it in at 12:15. The ending is wrong, that much I know, and I realize it's because I can't find the right words for my emotions in the moment I describe. This frustrates me. The spot stays raw. I'm glad. When I read the piece aloud in my workshop, my cohort encourages me to, in effect, make it sadder. They're glad to have gotten to see my brother's personality a little more, they say, but where are you? I don't say that I'm not sure, and that not sureness is the reason I alternate between crushing numbness and nearly smashing my car into the concrete divider every time a Blink-182 song comes on the radio on my way to work. Instead, I nod silently and find myself wishing against my own will that everyone was being a little more complimentary. It's good after all, I know it is, and had I read it somewhere else by some other sad surviving sister, I'd have been struck by the structure, might have thought it uncanny and even lucky for the writer to have such a perfectly ironic story to tell. Instead, my classmates ask me when my brother died and are visibly shocked by my answer. "Oh my God, I would have thought it was years ago. You've processed it so well," says one woman. My stomach turns and I think this will make a good essay. Thank you. And now it is my honor to introduce Jordan Robinson, a fabulous fiction writer who writes with the realism of a memoirist and the language, passion, and flavor of a poet. Take it away, Jordan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that lovely warm welcome, Kim. I appreciate it. Today, I'll be reading a passage from my short story called Row Home Pastures, which is a part of my larger collection called Something in the Blood. Here's a little sneak peek of the cover. Okay. This story that I'll be reading is about coming home to a row home in Baltimore. Where do you go after work? You go where the city lives, where they say everybody looks the same, poor the same, dark the same, down off North Avenue in Rosedale or Longwood in Bloomingdale or Baker in Poplar Grove, where nobody knows where you live until they dropping you off on the block like, oh, you live here? You nod and say, yeah, this me. The house with the blue awning. Your finger points to one of the tidiest row homes on the block. Its brick varnished a dusty brown red. Its awning is a bright royal blue against the dark. The silhouette of it glows a transcendent white under the street lights. Your friends, though, they don't see the light. They turn down their music and drive slow down the block. Their backs straight, their hands at 10 and 2. Where they live, though, somewhere safer, they're thinking. They drive so slow, they almost ride past your home. But you take it easy on them. You smile, shake your head, grab your bags, and unbuckle your seatbelt, pulling on the door handle before the car even stops. You can stop here. It's me, you say. They don't pull over, pull back, or pull up to the curb. They throw on their hazards, and you unlock the door yourself, stepping out into the darkness of your block, avoiding the crunch of little black water bugs under your feet. Be easy, you say, and they say, be safe. You close the door and hear the thwip of their car door locking behind you as you tread down the block. When friends give you a mercy ride home, they try their hardest not to look at the splintered wood boards, cracked sidewalks, broken windows, trash-filled yards, and overgrown hedges. They like to look away, but you look right at it every day. When you get home from work, you sprint up huge blocks of peeling white cement steps, stepping under the shade of your awning. Daddy keeps the porch light on whenever you ain't home. Sometimes on the hot days, he keeps the door open so the summer air fills up y'all's house like thick smog. One time, a friend asked if it was safe to do that living in the neighborhood y'all do. You laughed at her and said, it ain't all that bad. You walk into a warm home. Brown paneling and off-white walls surround you. It's outdated and a little dusty, but it smells like Daddy got something cooking on the stove. You hang your coat on the coat rack next to the door, leaving your bags to unpack later. You follow TV noises and clanking into the small living room with low ceilings and arched entryways. There is little room, but so much light. You find your parents setting a small table for dinner in the open kitchen. Your mama asks, how you doing, baby? And tells you to wash your hands while Daddy finishes stirring the pot. It smells like chicken and dumplings and maybe some collard greens too. Y'all sit at a small table and laugh with each other about the day, tucked into the rundown row home pasture. Thank you. Now, it is my honor to introduce a fellow MFA graduate whose writing is as bold and rhythmic as he is. Anthony McKissick is a photojournalist, filmmaker, blues guitarist, painter, educator, and most importantly, today he's a memoirist, reading a selection from his book, Ritual and Recall. Welcome the very talented Anthony McKissick, also known as Tony.
I'll be reading from my book, Ritual and Recall. The section that I've chosen is called Reverend Ike. Down in Tennessee, where my grandma lived, numbers were illegal. So when she won, which I remember to be quite often, her loophole for illegal gambling was that it was a blessing. And a portion of her winnings always went to the church. Not a real church, though, but the one she listened to in her kitchen while cooking breakfast. She had lucky coins, handkerchiefs, and bottles of holy water, too. Simple nigger tchotchkes sent to her in return for her monetary love gifts. These were kind of like those Mojo Hands or High John the Conqueror charms affiliated with voodoo, and they kept the luck going. Difference was that her stuff was from God and not part of no voodoo or root work. Grandma would plead the blood of Jesus quicker than a big bitch if she suspected any type of witchy shit going on. The flip with that is, though, Grandma only used the money from her pension and cake baking business for tithing in real church on Sunday and didn't dare tempt Jesus with that numbers loot. It always amazes me when I find out that two seemingly different folks are really the same, just like two drunks. The one sipping on that wine don't get the same flack as the one taking that pint in the bag to the head. Grandma's slew of trinkets collected over the years, be it a coin, cloth, or a bottle of holy water, had one thing in common. They were all engraved, embroidered, or labeled like this: Reverend Ike, you can't lose with the stuff I use. United Church of Science and Living Institute, New York, New York. Grandma would be in the kitchen on Saturday morning, cooking up breakfast, and over the top of the boiling grits and crackle of sausage and country ham grease, the radio would be spitting Ike's jive. Let me talk to you about Reverend Ike's 10 Commandments of money. Let me hear you proclaim money is wonderful stuff. I see and feel myself having and enjoying more money. Next up will be Sierra Farrar. Sierra's stories are gems of psychological realism. She critiques social conventions and narratives about dating, race, and family. Please give it up for Sierra.
Thank you for the introduction, Tony. Today, I will be reading a ghost story twice removed from my collection, Friday Night Hand Grenade. This story is aptly titled The Ghost Next Door, 1996. I was 2 years old when Richie Thompson went missing, 1988. Back then, I was barely more than a twinkle in my daddy's eye, Mama said. Every time she said that, it messed me up. I mean, I didn't really know what it meant. He was our next door neighbor, Mama said at the dinner table. I mean, that could have been D or you. Mama said the only reason the Thompsons never moved away was because Richie was their only child, and they just kept hoping that he would come home one day. A vigil, she said, seemed like a sure sign that he never would. Look at Michelle Dorr, Daddy said, piling mashed potatoes high onto his plate. Nothing. The police have nothing. She was a little white girl, walked outside to get in the pool and was never heard from again. A little white girl. Mama told me later that he'd been saying that since 2 days after Richie Thompson disappeared. Little black boys just aren't found, Dee chimed in, earning a proud look from my dad. Don't you go around putting that shit out there just because you heard your daddy say it, Mama said from her side of the table, shutting them both up with a look of her own. I looked down at my plate, scooping up peas with my fork, but when I looked back up at Mama again, she looked scared or sad. Are they really that different? Dion was 21, but he still didn't dare defy Mama. He'd moved out a few years ago to go to college in Rhode Island, but didn't come home once he was done. I mean, he'd graduated and all, but he still never really came around. Except for tonight. He came home early, so he'd be here for the vigil tomorrow. Mama spent the whole day cleaning his room just so he could sleep in there while he was here. All day, like he was some guest instead of just Dee. Richie Thompson was his best friend, I think. He never told me for sure, but I know they hung out all the time and they walked home together from school sometimes. at least until that summer. Then Richie was just gone. That's what Dee said, gone. We all waited for it to be completely dark before we huddled in Thompson's backyard. It was summertime, so it was still hot out, even after the sun was long gone. Mama told me I needed to behave myself, not make too much noise. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were sitting next to a big picture of Richie, and it was the first time I found out what he looked like. He had an afro like on one of Daddy's disco records and a smile that took up his whole face. We were all holding candles and standing real close together, and somebody walked around and started lighting them all. Some people were crying, and even though I couldn't really see him, I think my daddy was too. He had one hand on my shoulder the whole time Mrs. Thompson was talking. I don't really remember much of what she said, just Daddy's hand on my shoulder and the tears he wouldn't let me see. Before y'all go, Mrs. Thompson started, sounding like her whole face would split apart if she started crying again. We gonna be moving out of the neighborhood. Everyone's been so kind these past years, but it's time for us to go. When I turned my head back to look at Mama, she just turned me back around so I could pay attention, like she does in church. The grass in the Thompsons' backyard was tall, so long that it curled up between my toes in my flip-flops and scratched at my ankles. When we first walked over here, Mama told me not to complain about it. They got more to worry about than their backyard. They're out here missing their baby. I held onto my candle, letting it drip all over my fingers while Mrs. Thompson talked, sometimes stopping to cry, while I tried not to think about the grass. Thank you. Next up, to close out our show, we will be hearing from Tafisha Edwards. Tafisha is a powerful and thought-provoking poet. You will find yourself leaning in closer just so you don't miss a single word she is saying. So Tafisha, take it away.
It is an honor and privilege to have heard the wonderful works of the 2021 graduating class. And I'm ending up the reading a selection from my collection In the Belly of the Mirror. This first poem is a poem about grief. Ode to the lost tissue. Ode to what the doctor declines to call a baby, so praise the fetal pole and thin yolk sac margins, to the miscommunication of my anatomy and its mysteries. Ode to the amniotic gods, to blood-thick water and the sharks that circle. Ode to glitched motherhood and debts I am owed, 20 fingers, 2 hearts. To the breasts still responsive to hope, their milk buoy tenderness, and the underwire hands that cup them. Ode to my mother's dreams of fish and her ledger of little omens, to grief and its cobalt rooms, to the dilation of the cervix, to curchage, scraping, suction. Ode to the salve of wine, to sleeps of all kinds, induced and otherwise. The next poem I'm going to read is titled Groom Free. When I was younger, I almost lost an eye to a curling iron. Arch, wax, shave, spray, tease, 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 perm, relax, tint, gel polish, rip, contour, highlight, blush, lash lift. My mother almost plucked my eye out my skull with a hot comb, conceal, color correct, plump, hydrate, microblade, cleanse. Oh, you thought this was free. She blew out, curled, snip, cut, cut, snip. No time to blot the blood tear. Shape up, you're grown enough to darken, tweeze, bleach, stretch, jerry curl, twist, touch up, laser, blow out, thread, curl, line, fill in, tint, peel, repair, buff, leave in, no fantasies. Don't need an eye to look good. No parabens, no sulfates, silk wrap, glue, inject, exfoliate, microdermablade, darken, pin, curl, conk, brighten, whiten, lighten, repeat. My mother almost. This is the final poem entitled Joie de vivre. I never said it wasn't ridiculous. My disco heart, my kitchen couch covered in blue, me telling my mother, you're selfish. The crying at my desk on the train, undercover and over rejection letters and nightmares as Delilah plucks out my eyes, and the crying because my body now vibrates with feeling. There's just this zzz, and now my chest harbors fugitive bees. Now my chest is a honeyless hive. I only said, I'm not disappointed. I was too incompetent to overdose, and I'm too tired to pretend I don't panic attack or shower when it gets really bad. I'm just saying, this feels like a life. I'm just saying, I'm glad that it's mine. Thank you.